Jacob's name means heel grabber, a supplanter. Jacob's mother, Rebekah, was so distressed during her pregnancy that was warring inside of her that she asked God for understanding. And God told Rebekah, there are two nations in your womb, and that one will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger. And it happened just as God said it would. Esau was the firstborn, a red and hairy baby. Jacob was the secondborn, holding on the heel of his brother. But Esau, who was the oldest, he sold his birthright to Jacob. Sold it to him. Sold his birthright. Then to make sure that Isaac gave the blessings to Jacob, he put some goat skin on his arms and received the blessings as well. And after learning this, Esau vows, I'm going to kill him. I'm going to get him as soon as we stop mourning. Esau's descendants became Edom, and Jacob's descendants became Israel, which are a people. And here we have Jacob, who after 20 years of working for his uncle, has a dream where God reminded him of the promise he made to Abraham. So we have God, he reaffirms Jacob that he is the chosen. Here we have 20 years gone by. God came and reaffirmed that he is the chosen one. That's why it's so important when God have given you a dream or God have given you a promise or if God have told you to the Father who sit high and look down low. Genesis 27:41 said, Esau held a grudge against Jacob because of the blessings his father had given him. He said to himself, the days of mourning for my father are almost over. Then I would kill my brother Jacob. He grieved only for a short while, but his anger against his brother was so deep. Genesis 27:34 says, when Esau heard his father's words, he burst out with a loud and bitter cry and said to his father, bless me too, my father. Esau sold his birthright for some soup. Esau did not care what his mother and father thought. He did his own thing. So we have Esau who sells his birthright to Jacob for a bowl of soup. This is probably one of the most impressionable traits of Esau was the lack of spiritual depth he held for the value system of family. How in the world will you sell your birthright for some soup? Only thing he thought about was short term. He didn't think about the long-term effects. And sometimes we can be just like Esau. We are in temporary situations, and we make some long-term decisions that are going to impact us for the rest of our life. That's why we have to make sure that we're doing what God has called us to do. We got to make sure that we're aligned with God has called. We got to make sure that even though times may be hard, now is not the time to take a shortcut. He was short-sighted. He was big and bold. He was on a mission to get revenge and kill Jacob. And now you have 400 men that's coming along with him on this journey. Needless to say, Jacob shared a bit of anxiety because when you go and read the text, Jacob goes to God and pray and said, Lord, I fear for my life. He gonna kill me. He was afraid, even though God told him to go back and told him the promises of Abraham was going to fall upon him and his descendants. Sometimes it is scary to walk into what God have called us to do or his promises, but it's necessary if we're going to receive what God has for us. Don't be afraid nor dismayed. Imagine Jacob replayed this meet up over and over in his head. He replayed so much that he sent his wives, his children, and all his possessions across the river later that evening. Only Jacob remained at the camp. That's when this encounter happened. The Bible says, after wrestling with God, Jacob was left with a limp, a painful reminder of his divine encounter. Jacob received the blessing. Jacob came out with his name changed to Israel. Jacob also walked around with a reminder of that struggle and that encounter that he had. He left that camp with a limp. He left that camp in pain. It is said even in the Bible that to this day they do not eat the tendon of the hip of no kind of animal. Now, I snapped the tendon in his finger right here and I broke it. And my God, it is painful. It's like a toothache. And sometimes this pain radiates this whole hand and up and down my arm. And so I can't imagine how he must have felt. How that pain was so intense. Now, my finger hurt, but the hip, I don't want this to be in my hip. Nevertheless, Jacob limps right into his leadership role, leading with a limp because there was still work to be done. Leading with a limp because God made a promise. Now I need to keep my end of the bargain. Leading with a limp because pain doesn't mean life stops. Pain does not put a halt on our responsibility. Many of us today know the discomfort associated with unexpected pain, unexpected trials, broken hearts that rips us right back upon. When somebody says something, it triggers everything that has happened in our past, our broken heart, the weight of responsibility with the weight of reward. Life does not stop because you have a limp. You may desire to quit, but you can't. You may prefer to sit down on the sidelines, but you can't. There is a promise ahead. There is a divine reward at the end of the tunnel. There's a destination ahead for you. We have to figure out how to lead despite being blessed and broken. Jacob was blessed and broken at the same time. Jacob didn't have the luxury of giving up. He didn't have the luxury of calling a timeout. He didn't have the luxury of calling on a friend to lead his family to meet Esau. Jacob had to lead his family. Jacob was carrying God's promise. There are times in our life when we have to push past the pain that is in our life and lead according to God. Push past the uncertainty and lead according to God. Push past the mistreatment and lead according to God. Push through the injustice and lead according to God's will. Jacob had to meet Esau in order to fulfill the promise God showed Jacob in a dream. Jacob had to cross the river limping. Jacob had to think through everything, how to get his family all lined up and come up with a strategy just in case Esau pop off. What we can learn from this text is there is a faith that moves despite uncertainty. There's a faith that tells you to get up and keep going. There's a faith to tell you that this is not the end. There's a faith to tell you, I know you're hurt. I know you're sad. I know you're broken, but God is requiring you to get up and do what he has called you to do. We cannot allow the pains of life to hinder our destiny. For this you are called. For this you are chosen. For this God favor has kept you. Jacob was blessed and broken at the same time. And he was bound to fulfill the promise of God. Jacob push past the pain. How many times in your life where your life was painful? Maybe the doctor gave you a bad report. Maybe you got pain in your body. Maybe you were laid off on a job. You was fired from a job. Maybe doors were closed in your face. Maybe relationship that you admired was broken. What do you do when God is calling you to get up and lead and your life is broken? You're trying to figure out how to get your own life together and lead. The uncertainty, the pain, the turmoil, the struggle, the fear, the anxiety, the depression, everything that you're facing. How do I lead? What must I do? And so when we analyze this text, first point, we must shield the vulnerable. Then Jacob looked up and saw Esau coming with his 400 men. So he divided the children among Leah, Rachel, and his 2 servant wives. He put the servant wives and their children at the front. Now, he did this because they were the oldest now. Now, he loved Rachel now. He wanted to marry Rachel, but his father-in-law tricked him. And so he married Leah. And then Leah was next. I ain't going to talk about Leah. Leah, her children were next. And Rachel and Joseph were last because they was the youngest. That's what we're going to say anyway. Jacob didn't know his intentions. He surely didn't know why was he coming to meet me with 400 people. Can you imagine? You get a report. The last time you had an encounter with your brother, he said he was going to kill you, so you had to run to a foreign land and go live with your uncle and work 20 years, and God gives you a dream to tell you to go back home, and now you have got word that there are 400 people coming with Esau. What do you do when you don't understand or know what God is trying to do? But according to Jacob, you just get up and move forward, and whatever happens, happens. He was able to organize his family to shield the most vulnerable and went ahead of all of them. Think about Jacob with a limp and pain, still coming up with a strategy. Even when we're in pain and we're suffering, we still have to come up with a strategy if we're going to continue to lead according to God in leadership and service. We must put the safety and well-being of those who we leave above ours. Pain and uncertainty often tempts us to fall back and retreat. It's easy to retreat and fall back. I have been there before. Lord, I don't want to get out of the bed. Lord, I don't want to continue to move forward. God, I just want to sit down, take a sabbatical for years. But when God tells you no, you got to get up and go. Think about it. All the hardship you have been through. Some of us did get on the sideline. But I'm glad you're back in the game. Some of us did quit for a short period of time. I was talking with this guy yesterday that was a preacher. He went to this church anyway. He left this church, and for 3 years, he did not go anywhere. Because he was hurt, he was broken by what transpired at the church. The pain was unbearable. Think about it. What would you have done if they came and told you that there's 400 people with Esau? Be honest with yourself. Most of us would have been afraid. Most of us wouldn't have went. Most of us would have stayed somewhere else. We wouldn't have done God's will, but God is calling us even in the face of uncertainty, trials, and tribulation. We have to continue to move forward and lead according to God's will. And when you're leading, you have to be able to shield those who you're leading. And the next thing you got to, if you're going to lead in a godly way, you must show humility. Then Jacob went on ahead. As he approached his brother, he bowed to the ground 7 times before him. 7 times. So Jacob takes the lead in approaching Esau, but not only getting in front of his family so that he's the first one to take all the impact, but he also bows 7 times. Jacob is signaling to Esau the desire to have peace. Jacob is humble enough to say, I come in peace. Jacob could have arrogantly brought up that God's blessings are upon me. God gave me the dream. God showed me that I am the chosen one. But Jacob, he had humility so that God's will could be done. And sometimes as leader, we have to take the low road. We have to be humble if we're going to lead in a godly way. We can't be arrogant. We can't always be flamboyant. We can't always think we are right. But Jacob, who God promised everything to, was able to humble himself 7 times. Jacob comes with a gesture of respect. And as a leader, you have to respect those who are under you. As a leader, you have to respect those who are around you. If you're going to lead in a godly way, it doesn't matter how they respond to you. It doesn't matter what they do. But as a leader, you have to be the example of what righteousness is. If all of us ran around and get back, none of us would never be righteous. Jacob was intentional about showing his respect because he bowed 7 times. We understand 7 is the number of completion. Jacob, in essence, showed Esau that he completely respected him. He wanted complete peace between their two families and their kingdom. Jacob showed humility as leaders, as servants. We cannot allow our personal pain to jeopardize the condition of our hearts that make us have resentment, that make us be bitter, that make us to be angry. We cannot jeopardize the conditions of our heart just because we are struggling in our own life. So in other words, you have to put peace over pride in position. You have to put peace over pride in position. Humility softens the heart and gives room for God to come in and set the tone for restoration. Humility blocks the hostility and creates room for relationships to be mended. Leading with humility takes away the overwhelming urge to defend your action or your existence. Jacob bound 7 times is letting Esau know, I don't want to talk about the soup. I don't want to talk about the death threats. I don't want to talk about mama and daddy. I don't want to lay claim to anything that you have, brother. I just want to see my brother and come back home and do what God have called me to do. Sometimes we can get so caught up in all the things that are going on and we cannot even see the bigger picture that God is trying to do. As leaders, we have to be able to drown out all the noise, all the talk, all the gossip. We got to drown it out so that we can make sure that we're doing what God have called us to do. So we have to have humility so that we can hear from God. Think about it. All the stuff that went on. 20 years have passed by. Jacob knew what happened. Esau knew what happened. But Jacob had enough sense to have humility, y'all. We have to have humility if we're going to lead people to Christ. If we're going to help people to be transformed. If people are going to encounter God. If we're going to embrace others. We're going to empower our community. We have to have a spirit of humility. He did not allow the pain of his past to trigger rage. Jacob humbled himself because Esau illustrated leadership by embracing him. They cried together. Can you imagine for a moment? Think about somebody that you don't like. Think about somebody to get on your nerves. Whether you're at work, home, church, wherever you're at, community, I don't know. If you humble yourself and be the bigger person, it ain't always fun being the bigger person. Sometimes you hate being the bigger person. Sometimes you want to get people told. Tell them just like it is. But God is calling leaders to be the bigger person. He's calling believers to be the bigger person. If we're going to reflect who God is, y'all, we have to be the bigger person. Last thing, as a leader, we have to seek reconciliation. Then Esau ran to meet him and embraced him, threw his arms and neck and kissed him, and they both wept. Because Jacob came correct, Esau's heart went from murder and revenge to a warm embrace. Y'all, if we learn how to have reconciliation in our life, we're able to soften hearts of those who are mad at us and angry. We, as a believer, there's no way you can be a believer and not have reconciliation, because that's what God is doing to us. When he sent Jesus to die on the cross, he wanted us to be reconciled back to him. So as a believer, we got to reflect reconciliation. Even though you don't want to forgive him, even though you don't want to talk with him, even though you don't want to serve with him, even though you don't want to work with him. But this is what God is telling his church today, to reconcile all your faults, everything that you don't like, everything that has happened to you. Reconcile so that we can do the will of God. Reconcile so the power of God can manifest in this place. Reconcile so that your marriage can be on the right track. Reconcile so that your children can be raised and know who their mom and dad are. Reconcile your life. Reconcile your life. Jacob was seeking reconciliation. He embraced Esau. He hugged them. Both cried. God's leaders must pursue healing and unity, even when it comes with a personal cost. God leaders must pursue healing and unity, even when it comes with a personal cost. If you're going to be a God leader, then you're going to put aside all your differences. You're going to let aside every weight, every sin. You're going to let aside every hatred, anger, resentment you have in your heart. You're going to lay it aside so that you can be the light of the earth, that you can be the salt who hasn't lost its flavor. You can be what God have called you to be. We can operate in the fruits of the Spirit. God leaders must pursue healing and unity, even when it comes with a personal cost. Even just being a believer, not just leaders, we got to pursue healing and unity, even when it comes with a personal cost. Put aside your differences. Put aside your pain. Put aside the resentment. Jacob did not allow the pain he experienced physically to disrupt what God was doing spiritually and emotionally to the twins' relationship. Sometimes pain and past mistakes can hold us back. But Jacob's encounter with God that left him injured reminds him of the pain and promise can coexist. I can be in pain and still be in his promise. Just because you're in pain, it doesn't mean that God is not going to give you your promise. Because your pain sometimes will push you into your purpose. Your pain will push you into your destiny. The things you have been through your life, the suffering, the tears, the broken heart, it did not happen for no reason. God said he's going to use every pain, everything that you have been through. He's going to use it for your good. He's going to allow you to be pushed because of your pain. Your pain going to bring out the godliness. Your pain is going to allow you to get down on your knees. Your pain going to cause you to be humble. Your pain going to cause you to make sure that you're doing what God has orchestrated for you to do. Your pain is going to make sure that your life is lining up with the will of God. Your pain is not in vain. Tell your neighbor your pain is not in vain. Tell your other neighbor your pain is not in vain. I don't know what you've been through. I don't know the things you have faced, but I know your pain is not in vain. Your pain is not in vain. The tears are not in vain. The brokenness is not in vain. God is going to use all your brokenness for his glory. pain is going to push you into your destiny. Jacob wrestled with God all night long. Jacob endured and held on, but still came out of the fight broken and pain. Even though he came out considered a winner, he still was broken and in pain. Jacob did not have time to bind himself, or he did not have time to go try to receive treatment for the pain. Jacob had an assignment, an appointment with a promise from God. All Jacob could do was catch up to his family and lead them to the promise God had told them. All Jacob could do is take the blessings with him and use it as motivation to travel with the pain. Sometimes life will throw a curveball. I know it's not fair. I know it's not just, but it's necessary for God's people to keep their eyes on the promise in order to keep moving through the pain. Leading with a limp is not a new concept. There are several people in the Bible who went through hardship, who went through pain in order to achieve the promise of God. Joseph pushed past the pain of betrayal and slavery, falsely thrown into prison, lied on. But in order to fulfill God's promise, he kept the dream that God showed him in his forefront, even though it was painful. Moses pushed past the pain of self-doubt, Pharaoh's opposition in order to fulfill the promises of freeing the children of Israel. Hannah had to push past the pain of barrenness and being ridiculed and talked about and marked to fulfill the promise to Samuel would be born. David had to push past the pain of being hunted down like a dog by Saul in order to fulfill the promise of the anointed king. Job had to push past the pain of loss and grief in order to see the promise that God had given him. Ruth had to push past the pain of losing her husband, leaving her homeland, not understanding what's going to happen to her, because Jesus came out of that lineage. Esther had to push past the pain of fear that her husband was going to kill her if he came unannounced, but God given purpose for his people to stand up. Paul pushed past the pain of being beaten, being in prison, shipwrecked, rejected, and thorns in his side in order to fulfill the mission of bringing the message of Christ. Peter pushed past the pain of denying who Christ was in order to preach to the 3,000 and begin God's church. Mary had to bear the pain of social judgment because she was pregnant before she got married. Jesus endured the pain, being talked about, being whipped all night long. Jesus, the Savior, the one who came that we may be reconciled back to God. Jesus had to push past the pain of a cross on his shoulder, push past the pain of being whipped, push past the pain of a crown of thorns on his head, push past the pain of people talking about it, push past the pain of people aborting him, push past the pain of people betraying him, push past the pain of people denying him. Jesus decided that I'm going to keep the mission in the forefront. So he decided to go up Calvary's mountain. He decided to look out before the people and say, Father, forgive them, they know not what they do. He decided to lay down his life. They did not take his life, but he laid down his life so that we can be reconciled back to God, so that we can be washed in his blood. He decided to go down in a borrowed tomb. He decided to bust hell gates wide open and preach to those who were lost. He decided to get up early that third day morning and say, we all have power. He decided our Savior is the living testament to leading with a limp, serving with a limp. This is a season where even though we're limping, even though we're in pain, even though we are broken, God is saying now it's not the time to quit. Now it's not the time to walk away. Now it's not the time to say I'm done. But God is telling you to stand up and do the work of the Lord. Tell your neighbor to stand up and do God's work. Stand up and continue to look at what God has shown you. Don't get distracted by what's going on around you, but stand up and keep your eyes upon the Lord. Stand up. Leading with a limp, leading with a broken heart, leading with uncertainty. Jacob, 20 years, went through a lot of things, had abandoned his family, was tricked by his uncle, Jacob is a reminder, even though you may be limping around, barely getting by, now is not the time to throw in the towel. As leaders, as people of God, now is not the time. You're right on the verge of a breakthrough. You're right on the verge of that door being open. You're right on the verge to receive the thing you've been praying about for 5, 10 years. You're right on the verge of that breakthrough. And the Lord is saying, don't quit. I know you're limping. I know you're in pain. As he told Paul, my grace is sufficient. So God's grace is sufficient for whatever pain, whatever limp, whatever brokenness you may have. His grace is sufficient to give you the strength to do what he has called you to do. But you must have a mind like Jacob. Even with this limp, I'm going to continue. The doors are open. The doors are open. The doors are open. The doors are open. Everybody have influence on somebody else. Whether you're a pastor, whether you're a deacon, whether you don't have a title, you have influence. And so that's why it's important that we become godly leaders. Godly leaders. Anybody can be a leader, but it takes a person after God's heart to be a godly leader.